Raymond quickly walked through the crowd, the tension in the air undeniable. Suddenly, the ground beneath him shook violently. A terrifying sound, as if the entire city was being torn apart. Skyscrapers began to collapse, windows shattered into sharp pieces. Everything around him swayed, people panicked and screamed. He didn't have time to think much, he just knew he had to run toward safety. Then, out of nowhere, a weak voice called out amidst the debris, "Sir, sir." Raymond turned around, stunned for a moment, and saw a 10-year-old girl, covered in dirt, clutching his hand. Her eyes were filled with fear and desperation. "My mom is still down there." She pointed toward the rubble. Where heavy concrete slabs had trapped her mother, Raymond froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Since the disaster, everything had one goal: survival. But now, a question lingered in his mind: save myself, or go back and save someone else? New York, autumn. Cold winds swept across the wide boulevards, blowing a gray scarf loosely wrapped around the neck of the man stepping out of the glass skyscraper in the middle of Manhattan. It was his building, Raymond Lancaster, a symbol of success, power, and the fortune that most people could only dream of. Raymond Lancaster, 52, was the embodiment of modern America, intelligent, ruthless, decisive, and unforgiving of weakness. He headed Lancaster Holdings, a sprawling conglomerate spanning technology, finance, real estate, and artificial intelligence. His company was the Alpha Lion, swallowing smaller businesses, consolidating markets, and always appearing in the top Fortune 50. A typical day for Raymond began at 4 a.m. He woke up without the need for an alarm clock, without coffee, or anyone calling him. His body was a machine, programmed precisely after decades of living like a warrior. An hour of exercise. A breakfast with no more than 3 ingredients. A video call with the London office. Every step in his day was planned in advance, and every conversation had a clear purpose. For him, time was money, and emotions were an obstacle. He spoke little. When he did, his voice was deep, clear, and without a word wasted. He never shouted. His silence often frightened others more than any scolding could. His gray eyes were cold, deep, and expressionless. His staff called him the ice wall. While the media described him as a brilliant mind with a heart of stone, Raymond disliked crowds, loathed social dinners, and especially hated television interviews. The charity galas he attended were just formalities, a handshake, a forced smile, then disappearing before anyone could ask any deeper questions. His home was just like him, clean, perfect, with nothing superfluous. On the walls were abstract paintings worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, but he didn't know the names of the artists. In the kitchen were the finest appliances, but he had never used them. The bedroom was soundproof, the only place where he felt truly in control of silence, his personal driver. Private chef, and assistant all functioned like a well-oiled system, designed to serve a man who had no time for the messiness of daily life, but beneath this perfect exterior was a man who had sacrificed nearly everything. Years ago, Raymond had been a tender husband, a father who loved cooking breakfast for his son on weekends. But work, endless business trips, and the pressure to expand his empire gradually caused him to be absent from his own life. The price he paid could not be counted in money. On the day his wife and child died in a car accident, he was in Tokyo, negotiating a $900 million deal. He didn't return in time. From that day on, he severed all ties with his emotions. No more Christmas, no more birthdays, no more holidays with meaning. Work became the only escape from the memories. A perfect metal shell, but hollow inside. That morning, Raymond sat by the window, sipping black coffee with no sugar. Eyes watching the birds fly across the city. Below were millions of small people chasing their lives, and up above, he, like a lonely god, looked down. His assistant entered, announcing a business trip to a suburban area in northern New Jersey, where a new factory was facing issues with the local authorities. Raymond frowned. He hated leaving Manhattan. He hated the rural landscape with weak phone signals, poor infrastructure, and the locals staring at him as if he were from another planet, but he didn't refuse. He never refused anything that could impact business performance. That was the only principle that kept him connected to the world. The helicopter took off from the city at 11 a.m. On the flight, he flipped through the project files, scribbling notes onto the documents, every action precise. Cold. Below, there was a small town with scattered houses, forests ablaze with the fiery colors of autumn, and an air so fresh it left him feeling disoriented. Raymond stepped out of the car, walking briskly into the meeting room with a face that betrayed no emotion, leaving behind curious glances. He thought he would be back in New York within 36 hours. He didn't know that, in just a few hours, his entire world would change. The afternoon descended on the small town like a thin amber blanket. The sunlight slanted through the maple trees in the midst of their autumnal shedding, creating a scene of peace so still it felt almost suspended. No one, not even Raymond, could have predicted that in just a few minutes, everything would shatter like glass under the foot of fate. After a quick meeting with the local leaders, Raymond instructed his driver to take him on a tour of the area where the new factory was planned. It was a road winding along the foothills, rocky and uneven, flanked by small, old houses mixed with wild forests. The car moved slowly. Inside, he focused on the data sheets in the documents. His hand lightly tapping the edge of the leather seat, a habit whenever he was contemplating a big decision. Suddenly, a deep rumble echoed from the earth. Raymond frowned. The driver looked up from the steering wheel, his face filled with confusion. "What was that?" he asked, his eyes not leaving the windshield. No one had time to respond. The ground began to shake. At first, it felt like the light tremor of a car crossing a gravel road. But within seconds, the asphalt cracked into thin veins, widening into deep fissures. Trees swayed violently. Stones from the mountain slope tumbled down the road ahead. The sound of panicked birds flapping their wings filled the air. The car swerved like a boat in a storm. The afternoon descended on the small town like a thin amber blanket. The sunlight slanted through the maple trees in the midst of their autumnal shedding, creating a scene of peace so still it felt almost suspended. No one, not even Raymond, could have predicted that in just a few minutes, everything would shatter like glass under the foot of fate. After a quick meeting with the local leaders, Raymond instructed his driver to take him on a tour of the area where the new factory was planned. It was a road winding along the foothills, rocky and uneven, flanked by small, old houses mixed with wild forests. The car moved slowly. Inside, he focused on the data sheets in the documents, his hand lightly tapping the edge of the leather seat, a habit whenever he was contemplating a big decision. Suddenly, a deep rumble echoed from the earth. Raymond frowned. The driver looked up from the steering wheel, his face filled with confusion. "What was that?" he asked, his eyes not leaving the windshield. No one had time to respond. The ground began to shake. At first, it felt like the light tremor of a car crossing a gravel road. But within seconds, the asphalt cracked into thin veins, widening into deep fissures. Trees swayed violently. Stones from the mountain slope tumbled down the road ahead. The sound of panicked birds flapping their wings filled the air. The car swerved like a boat in a storm, earthquake. "Get out of the car, now," the driver shouted. Raymond had never experienced an earthquake. He had survived financial crises, but this was a different force, wild, unnegotiable, uncontrollable. Both of them jumped out of the car. Just seconds later, a large pine tree crashed down right where the car had been. Raymond stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time in many years, he felt like he wasn't the one controlling everything, but just a tiny creature in the fury of nature. He ran. Alongside the driver, they ducked into a narrow alley leading toward the residential area. Houses tilted dangerously. Roof tiles slid off with a deafening crash. Screams echoed from every direction, the elderly, children, women calling each other's names in panic. The ground cracked, walls collapsed, and power lines sparked. Smoke and dust filled the air, carried by the wind. Raymond was knocked down by someone running frantically. He tumbled down a slope, his hands scraping against the rough ground, blood starting to ooze from the wounds. The pain was nothing compared to the feeling of being torn away from the safe world he had built over the years. Here, no one cared that he was a billionaire, a CEO, or a game changer. Here, he was just a man running from death. After nearly 10 minutes of chaos, the earthquake stopped. The whole town seemed to hold its breath. A thick layer of dust covered everything, the streets, the rooftops, the people huddled in fear. Raymond stood up, breathing heavily, his clothes dirty, his suit jacket torn at the shoulder. He had never been in a situation like this. The feeling of losing control made him feel lost. He left the wrecked area and followed a small path that led to higher ground. From there, he could look down on the town. A large section of buildings had collapsed. Columns of smoke rose into the sky. Ambulances and fire trucks began to wail in the distance. His hands were still covered in dust and dried blood. He sighed, so tired that he could feel nothing anymore. He just wanted to get away from this place and return to New York, where everything was clean, clear, and in his control. And then, a small hand gripped his. Raymond turned around. A girl, about 10 years old, her hair tangled, her face smeared with dirt, was standing there, trembling. Her eyes looked up at him, wide, dark, glistening like a pool of water on the verge of overflowing. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She whispered, "Sir, my mom is still down there." The girl pointed toward the rubble at the bottom of the hill, where once there had been a row of one-story houses with red-tiled roofs. Now, it was just broken bricks, twisted steel, and the faint sound of someone crying from deep below. Raymond froze. Part of him wanted to turn away. He was safe, he had escaped. The woman below was a stranger, and so was this little girl. This wasn't his responsibility. He was a businessman, not a rescuer. He had been through enough to understand the line between the living and those who stayed behind, but that small hand still clung to his, like an anchor holding him to something very human. "My mom is trapped. I don't know what to do." At that moment, for the first time in many years, he had no answer, and for the first time, a voice inside him told him, "Go back." Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with the program, we kindly ask you to leave a comment with your thoughts and feelings below. If you find this program meaningful, don't hesitate to share it to support the channel and spread its value to those around you. We wish you all meaningful moments of listening. Amid the echoing explosions, the sound of crumbling bricks and stones, and the suffocating air, the little girl stood like a small shadow among the vast ruins. It seemed like everything around her had vanished, the houses, the familiar streets, the noises of the city, all were gone. All that remained was pain, fear, and a sense of helplessness. The little girl tightly grasped Raymond's hand. Her small hand surprisingly strong. Her eyes were no longer those of an innocent child, but filled with pleading and despair. She was no longer a 10-year-old girl, she looked like an adult facing a challenge that even grown-ups might not be able to overcome. Her mother was the only person in her small world, the only one she could trust. Her mother was everything to her, the one who taught her lessons of strength, the one who taught her that no matter what, she must stand up and never give up. But now, standing in front of life and death, the girl realized she couldn't do anything. Every second, the fear rose in her heart like an undercurrent. The fear wasn't because she might be in danger, but because she knew her mother was under the rubble, possibly unable to breathe, possibly in pain. She couldn't save her mother. She couldn't do anything. Every time she tried to call her mother's name, the words caught in her throat. She didn't dare cry, didn't dare show weakness. Her mother had taught her not to cry, to be strong. And now, standing on the edge of despair, the girl wished for a miracle. She wanted someone to appear and perform a miracle to save her mother. That was why the girl held on to Raymond's hand, as if he were her last hope, as if he were the only light in the thick darkness. She didn't know who he was, but in this moment, he was all she could rely on. My mom is still alive," she said weakly, as if trying to convince herself. These words were like pieces of hope gradually fading away. She wasn't sure about it, but if she didn't believe, if she didn't hope, she would have nothing left. My mom can't move. "Sir, please help me," she said, her eyes wide, filled with pleading, the confusion of a child who couldn't understand what was happening to her world. She didn't know if Raymond could save her mother, but she couldn't stop believing. She needed to believe that someone would save her mother. Every time the girl called him, her gaze was like a vow, a plea, and if Raymond didn't respond, she would have nothing left but emptiness. That feeling was unbearable, like a pain that pierced her heart. She couldn't endure the feeling of being alone. While Raymond stood motionless, his eyes full of inner conflict, the girl still held on to his hand, as if she feared that the slightest loosening, the slightest movement away from him, would make all her hope vanish. She didn't know what to do if he left. She didn't know if she could survive without her mother. Never in her life had she felt so alone and weak. A thought flickered through her mind: if her mother couldn't get out, what could she do to save her? It was a question the girl didn't want to face, but now, unable to stand on her own anymore, she felt completely helpless. She wanted to run into the rubble, to find her mother, but she knew she couldn't, and then, in that moment, when she felt engulfed by despair, she looked into Raymond's eyes. She knew that, even though he wasn't a familiar face, even though he might not care for her, here and now, he was the only one who could save her mother. No one else. The girl took a deep breath, trying to stop the tears that were welling up. She couldn't let herself be weak. Her mother had taught her to be strong. Her mother had taught her that no matter what, she must never surrender to fate. Once again, the girl's gaze sought Raymond. He couldn't turn away. She couldn't lose her mother. In this moment, the girl had only one fragile hope left: Raymond would save her. In this extended part, I focused on the psychology and emotions of the little girl, particularly her inner struggle and despair as she faced the fact that she could do nothing to help her mother. The girl's feelings were not only of fear but also the sole hope she had in Raymond, a complete stranger, yet the only reason she might survive. When the last aftershocks of the earthquake finally ceased, the air in the area became heavy and suffocating. A cloud of dust covered the entire street, while the faint light of the afternoon seemed like a strange sign of survival. Raymond stood silently amid the rubble, his hand still tightly grasping the little girl's small hand. The feeling from moments ago still lingered in his heart, a sense of indescribable doubt. As the girl's eyes searched his with absolute trust, he realized that she needed him now, but more than that, she needed a miracle. But why did it take him so long to think? Why couldn't he make a decision immediately? In that brief moment, Raymond's past rushed back to him, memories long buried. Now clear in his mind, years ago, Raymond had faced a similar situation. Back then, in a horrific car accident, he stood before a loved one, someone he cherished more than anyone else. She was crying out in pain, with serious injuries. Raymond vividly remembered her labored breathing and the fear in her eyes. At that time, Raymond hesitated. He thought he couldn't do much, thought he wasn't capable of saving her. He looked around, seeing everything happening too quickly, with people panicking and confused. He missed the chance, choosing to leave to avoid the danger. In the end, that loved one didn't make it. And the guilt and self-blame haunted him for years, like a wound in his soul that would never heal. But now, standing among the ruins, facing this little girl, Raymond couldn't let the past repeat itself. The hesitation had no place in his mind anymore. He couldn't keep running away, couldn't let the girl suffer the loss he had witnessed. He looked at the girl again. His heart was torn, but one thing was clear: he wouldn't leave. He wouldn't do what he had done in the past. Every decision in his life had been based on reason, on personal safety. But now, his reason could no longer stop the powerful urge in his heart. "I'll help you," Raymond said, his voice low but firm. He quickly pulled his hand away from the girls and began moving into the rubble. No more hesitation, Raymond started searching for a path to the girl's mother. He called out, asking for help from those around him, from the citizens who were panicking and trying to escape for themselves. But no one had the strength to do anything. Some were still confused, others still skeptical about the possibility of rescuing those trapped beneath the rubble. Raymond was left with just himself. He began digging, his hands covered in dirt and stones, his face coated with dust. Every shove of earth, every sound from beneath the rubble, was like a life-and-death struggle, with no one able to predict the outcome. The dust was blinding, and the suffocating air made it hard to breathe, but the drive to save the girl and her mother had become a powerful force, pushing him past all of those obstacles. The heat, the dust, the cramps in his body didn't stop, but he couldn't stop. Each heartbeat felt like an oath. He couldn't abandon someone again. Finally, after hours of intense effort, Raymond felt a change beneath his hands. Something soft, a human body, buried deep in the earth. He hurriedly dug deeper until his hand touched a cold, weak arm. It was the girl's mother. Without thinking further, Raymond lifted the mother, despite his body being exhausted to the point of collapse. A battle between life and death unfolded before his eyes. In the end, he pulled the girl's mother from the rubble. She was still alive, though unconscious, but she had been saved. Raymond looked at the little girl, her eyes still full of worry but now tinged with hope. A thank you, unspoken but clearly felt, echoed in the quiet space. After the earthquake passed, New York City was no longer the same. The streets now resembled large wounds, with debris scattered everywhere. The collapsed houses and skyscrapers had become heaps of steel and broken concrete. The roads were flooded with rubble, cars piled on top of each other, and the air was heavy with smoke and dust. The scenes were enough to make anyone shudder, as if a nightmare that would never end. But amidst the ruins of the city, a story began to spread. It was the story of a man, a wealthy and powerful CEO, who returned to save a little girl and her mother while everyone else was trying to escape the disaster. Raymond was not a hero in the eyes of others. But to the little girl and her mother, he was everything. And so, the story of him began to be spoken about, not just because of his act of saving lives, but also because of the change he underwent. The story of a man who could abandon his own safety to face death, simply because of a decision born from his heart, made people view him differently. He was no longer the cold, calculating leader, no longer the man who only cared about his own benefit. Raymond felt a profound change within himself. After saving the girl and her mother, he couldn't just return to his old life, where he only cared about work and numbers. He couldn't go back to the world he once lived in, where everything could be measured in profit. As time passed, Raymond began spending more time with the little girl and her mother, the ones he had saved. The girl's name was Lily, and her mother was a woman named Emma, a gentle but strong mother who had endured so much pain and loss during the earthquake. Emma was not just a survivor, but also a symbol of strength and boundless love. Raymond started visiting them every day. He was no longer just a stranger, but a companion in their process of rebuilding their lives. Simple tasks like helping them clear the debris, providing food, or just sitting with them, listening to their stories about the difficult days. All of these things made Raymond slowly realize that life was not just about numbers and contracts, but about people, relationships, and sincere emotions. One time, while walking with Lily in the area that had just been cleared, Lily said, "Uncle, thank you so much for saving my mom. I don't know what I would do without you." Her words made Raymond unable to hold back his emotions. His eyes welled up, because he had never imagined that his actions could affect someone else so deeply. The little girl was not just thankful for saving her and her mother's lives, but also for giving her a future, a chance to keep living and to dream of a brighter tomorrow. Although he had worked tirelessly to restore the company and the city, for the first time in many years, Raymond began to feel life in every moment. He found joy in the simple things, like seeing the bright smile of Lily every time she laughed, or sitting next to Emma, listening to her tell stories about her family and the beautiful memories before the earthquake. Raymond no longer felt alone. Work calls and important meetings no longer consumed his mind. He found peace in his heart when he was with Emma and Lily. They were no longer just the people he saved, but had become an important part of his life. One evening, while sitting with Emma and Lily by the fire, the warm light shining on their faces, Raymond suddenly realized something very important. He had lived too long in the world of work and money, and in doing so, he had missed out on so many precious things. He had forgotten that life was not just about material things, but about moments, connections with others, and sincere feelings. He felt that he was truly living again. He no longer felt like a cold man, but a person with a heart capable of love and care. Lily sat beside him, her eyes shining as she saw Raymond smile. It was that smile, the change in him, that made his life more meaningful than ever before. As New York City began to recover from the devastating earthquake, Raymond also began to feel the change within himself. No longer the man living in a world of money and power, he had found another life, a life he had never imagined, a life full of meaning and emotion. Every morning when he woke up, the light streaming through the window of the room where he had been staying with Emma and Lily, he no longer thought only of work or grand projects. Peace had begun to replace worries about money and success. He began to care more about the people around him, especially Emma and Lily. From a cold man, he had now become a father, a companion, someone always ready to listen and share. One morning, when Raymond was standing with Lily on the beach, looking out at the vast ocean, the little girl looked up and asked, "Uncle Raymond, have you ever thought that you could change someone else's life?" Raymond smiled, his eyes filled with warmth and peace he had never known before. "Lily, I think I've already changed. And it's you and your mom who've helped me see that life is not just about what we achieve, but what we give." The little girl sat down beside him, her tiny hand resting on his, feeling the warmth and peace of the man she had once only known through stories of heroes. Raymond was no longer a hero in her eyes, but a father, a close friend whom she loved and respected. As the days passed, Raymond no longer lived for himself. He began thinking about the future, a future that included not only him but also Emma, Lily, and the community he had saved. He spent more time helping them rebuild their lives, not just materially, but also emotionally. He knew that, beyond rebuilding the city, he needed to help people regain their faith in life, just as he had regained his own. Emma, the strong woman he had always admired, was now not only someone he had saved, but also a companion on the path to rebuilding their lives. She was a solid source of support for him, someone who had helped him realize that love and care were the keys to changing lives. One day, when Raymond's company was on the road to recovery, he stood in his office, looking out the window, reflecting on what had passed. The years he had lost faith in life and in people now suddenly became valuable lessons. He realized that all the success he had achieved before was meaningless without the connection and love between people. "Thank you, Uncle Raymond. Thank you for giving us a chance to live again." Those words from Lily echoed in his mind whenever he felt discouraged. Focusing on those he had saved, on the grateful looks from them, Raymond realized that it was love and sincere care that had helped him find himself. He no longer had to fight against the world outside because he had conquered himself. Life was no longer about what he had, but about what he could give. Raymond was no longer the man of a cold, indifferent world. He had become a friend, a father, and most importantly, a person who knew how to love and appreciate every moment of life. In the end, the story did not end with numbers or accomplishments. It ended with love, with a transformation of the soul, with learning how to love and share with those around you. Raymond no longer viewed life through the lens of calculation, but through sincere emotions, through relationships filled with love. As the sun set over New York City, Raymond stood on the balcony, looking out into the distance, and for the first time in many years, he truly felt alive. He knew that in this life, there was nothing more valuable than love and connection, and he had found that in the people around him. Both Emma, Lily, and all those who had stood with him through the challenges were now an irreplaceable part of his life. Raymond was no longer just the man of success, but a man of love and sharing. And that was what made him feel the most proud and happy in his life. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to share and subscribe to the channel to not miss other inspiring stories. Thank you for following and supporting.